Hello there, Brandon. How you doing?
Quite good, Professor Loury. How are you?
I'm doing fine, and feel free to call me Glenn if you want to. Glenn Loury here, The Glenn Show, bloggingheads.tv. I'm back. I'm at Brown University, professor of economics and professor of international and public affairs at the Watson Institute at Brown, which sponsors The Glenn Show. And I am with Brandon Ogbunu, and Brandon is a professor of biology here at Brown and is a geneticist. And we're just going to have a little talk. And I'm going to learn a lot from Brandon about the science behind how people are thinking about this COVID-19 viral epidemic, pandemic that has besieged us. So welcome, Brandon.
Thank you. Really, really pleasure being here.
What do you want people to know about your background and accomplishments before you start?
As you know, I'm currently an assistant professor in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, and I'm an affiliate with the Center for Computational Molecular Biology. My training is kind of, I'm a biologist who uses computational tools and some experimental tools to ask kind of questions in genetics, and I've also studied epidemics. So I kind of feast on kind of complicated problems in biology, problems involving kind of multiple interacting parts and features and actors. And so deconstructing complex phenotypes in genetics are kind of one area of interest, but also, things like epidemics, how they arise from the interaction between hosts and parasites in society. So I think this is an area that I've thought about now for quite some time.
Well, I feel fortunate to be able to ask you a few questions and hear you, opine a little bit on the topic of the day. I don't understand this virus. I don't know why it is so dangerous, so contagious, and why its advent constitutes such a global emergency. And I don't know much about how the science of developing responses to this condition plays out. And I just thought I'd pick your brain a little bit about that. So are you teaching at all on this subject now? It seems like it would be a fit thing for a guy like you to be doing.
Well,
if so, tell us what you're saying. I mean, I've got too many questions. I should let you give an answer.
I'm happy to answer any and all things as best as my ability. Well, I'm teaching a course on microbial evolution and ecology. And conveniently, right, that is a course that's designed to teach basic concepts about the way microbes live in this world and how evolution shapes them, and where they live and how they live, and that includes microbes that cause disease and those that do not. But conveniently, I think COVID-19 is a very, very kind of living example of microbial evolution and ecology concepts playing out in real time. And so, I made the executive decision, and it was a little bit challenging a decision to make, because part of me was like, well, maybe there's COVID exhaustion. I don't want to kind of talk about COVID too much. At the same time, I thought it's just too important and on everyone's mind. This is a good opportunity for us to kind of learn fundamental concepts in microbial ecology and evolution through this pandemic. And that's what we've done. And so we covered everything from basic concepts about viral phylogeny, this concept of how, species and taxa are related to one another, which of course plays out in understanding the origins, as we understand them, of SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, which is the disease. We have other questions about how it relates to SARS-CoV-1, which is the cause of, the first SARS kind of widespread outbreak from the early 2000s. We have questions about kind of the way viruses jump from species to species. Interesting questions about, control, the immune system, how organisms respond. Basic things about vaccinology. We're even going to work some mathematical modeling, because that's also been a very, very kind of contentious topic with COVID-19, is the use of mathematical models. As an economist, certainly you understand. And I think economists have actually gotten into the ring, so to speak, when it's come to understanding COVID-19's predictions for how it's going to spread. So we cover a range of topics on that. In addition to that, on COVID-19, I've done a bit of writing on this, actually, and my research group is actually preparing some studies, manuscripts on COVID-19 in the mathematical modeling sphere. So I've kind of tried to think about this problem carefully.
Okay, that's a lot. Maybe we could start just with this family of viruses and how the mutation process works, and where where they come from, one from another. So the coronaviruses are many different microbes. They are somehow related to each other in terms of their genetic structure, and they've evolved from one another in some way. Tell me about that.
Sure. So the coronaviruses are a large family of viruses, and they include many different viruses that we're familiar with. Obviously, SARS-CoV-1, which caused the first SARS kind of widespread pandemic in the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, which is another coronavirus, and really viruses that are associated with the common cold. We are a part of the coronavirus kind of large family. So there are a large family of viruses that circulate in many species throughout the world. And what are some unique features of them? And I think the thing about viruses in general is the way we think about relationships with viruses is a little bit different. It's not like viruses are like living things. They're not cellular life. They're not like human beings. They're not like bacteria. They're not like, right? They're not cellular living things. They're kind of, so the rules of biology as we understand them and the rules of phylogeny as we understand them with regards to interrelationships are a little bit different. So, for example, the thing about human beings, there's a tree of life. We all kind of go back to a common ancestor, right? And that's where these kind of different domains, and now they're saying there's 2 domains, but there was 3 kind of major domains. There's a lot of debates about that. Viruses is not quite the case. There's no like ancestor of all viruses as we understand it. Viruses are so vastly different from one another in structure and type and the way that their genomes are structured. I mean, it's so vast and different than one another that our rules of understanding cellular life don't even really translate. Now, in the context of coronavirus, it's this one family of viruses, and there are some things that are fairly unique about it. It has an RNA genome, which means its genomic information is made out of RNA and not DNA, okay, like a lot of viruses, Ebola and HIV and a lot of others. But it has one of the largest RNA genomes of any virus that we've seen. In fact, I think the largest of we've seen. So basically, it's a big virus genetically that has an RNA genome. And with that, we think that might be one of the reasons why we see a lot of different coronaviruses having success jumping from species to species, because perhaps that large genome confers some kind of adaptability. That kind of has this, and we don't. This is what the hypothesis is. We can't say this with any kind of authority, but this is what we suspect.
Now, I got to ask what's going to seem like a very elementary question: is it alive?
Great question. So I'll answer this question.
You said it's not a cell, so I'm just trying to figure out what.
So I'll answer this question the way a famous biologist named Eugene Koonin answered it, which is the question of whether or not a virus is a living thing or not is not a scientific question. It's an epistemological question, right? And the idea there is really like, it depends on what you mean by a living thing, frankly. So it does not obey the rules of the cell theory. The cell theory is the closest thing we have to rules defining life. You know, all cells come from pre-existing cells. All cells have DNA as their informational intermediate, and all cells metabolize energy, right? Viruses don't, some viruses have DNA genomes, but like they're exclusively parasitic. They only live on other cells. By and large, there's a few exceptions we think. So basically, by our general rules, no, they are not living things. They are obligate parasites. And so they wouldn't fit under a cellular life. They are biological light. They have these features of biological things, but they are not themselves living.
Here comes overly simplistic question number 2. If it's not alive, how do you kill it? Or perhaps what I mean to say is, how do you rid yourself of something that you can't kill?
That's right. So not to keep dropping these quotes, and probably famous quote from Predator, right? When they were trying to hunt the Predator, one of the best movies ever, Arnold Schwarzenegger says, if it bleeds, we can kill it. Talking about the Predator, because when they saw the blood. Which is a great line. It's an iconic science fiction line. So the point is, killing doesn't mean the same thing as it does for like life, where you kind of like deconstruct the cellular processes associated with the organism doing a thing. Killing just means kind of like in a very banal engineering sense of deconstructing it, pulling apart so that it can no longer replicate, it can no longer infect. That's what killing means in the context of virus. It is no longer capable of being able to carry out the functions of what a virus does, which are infect cells and replicate. That's what constitutes killing in the viral context.
Okay, so where do these things come from?
Viruses in general, or the
Well, I'm talking
coronavirus?
about this coronavirus family. I'm talking about the
Good.
ones that can cause great damage to human populations.
Yep. So they circulate in many different, mostly mammalian species, right? That's kind of one thing, right? The ones that seem to cause the worst diseases, so SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2, circulate in bats, and a couple of other other species as well. But we see them circulating in bats. The ones that cause the common cold, the coronaviruses that cause the common cold, mostly circulate in rodents, we think. This tips us off to its origin, right? So if we look at the SARS-CoV-2 virus that's causing, right, this global pandemic of COVID-19, it has about 96% genomic similarity. If you line up its genome to another genome, similarity to a virus that we've observed circulating in bats. So that tips us off as to kind of what happened in terms of its origin. We think that it actually was a virus that was circulating in bats and spilled over into human species.
Okay, now the virus, as I understand you, is a parasite. It lives in host. In the case at hand, the host would be bat populations. Is it injurious to the life prospects of the host in those animal populations?
Doesn't appear to be. Doesn't appear to be in the natural hosts in which it circulates. It does not appear to be especially injurious. And I think that's the thing about viral ecology is, we carry a lot of viruses that conceivably are injurious to other species. I mean, they do. A lot of viruses live perfectly kind of, peacefully, if you will. So it does not appear to cause the disease. I think what we've observed, this is actually a cutting edge topic now, is SARS-CoV-2, looks like it does cause symptoms in tigers. And we're discovering this. There was a tiger in the Bronx Zoo it was a tiger in the Bronx Zoo who conceivably got this from a zookeeper of some kind. So my point is we're learning this now in terms of some of the other species that it can live in and cause disease versus not. But no, its natural reservoir is what we call kind of the animal species that it circulates in naturally. Generally speaking, no, it is not injurious.
Now, am I mistaken in thinking, as a lot of the popular press is reporting, that these viruses, SARS, COVID-19, others, are emerging out of the East with relatively greater frequency than other places? Or is that... So MERS was a Middle Eastern phenomenon, but anyway, the question and it's got a political underlay to it because people are saying Wuhan virus, China virus, et cetera.
As somebody who thinks about the ecology of it, where you have a lot of people and you have a lot of people interacting with wildlife, you're going to get a lot of diseases. In general. So you're going to get a lot of marine disease. So Ebola, right, for example, right, from Central Africa mostly, emerges from its interaction between people and wildlife there. I think the East, as you described it, has the most people in the world. So I think we have a lot of people in a place and they're kind of buttressed against kind of a lot of species. To me, it's just a statistical artifact of right. I don't think there's anything. Yeah. So the answer is yes. There is. Yes, it is in the East, and we are seeing these come out of the East. But that's just a population size and ecology phenomenon.
Nothing to do with the wet market stuff that I hear people talking about.
I think any activity, maybe not, or maybe not again, I didn't quite say this clearly before, but any activity that increases the interaction between people that is involved in the encroachment of species onto other species, you're going to increase the probability of an emergence event. So it's a statistical thing. And I think there you have that. I think there's economic pressures that, as you know, right, that encourage kind of the exploitation of or the use of other kind of food sources and what have you. So I think insofar as you have that, I think it probably does have something to do with it. But I think the notion, we would be unwise kind of biologically and ecologically to think that can only happen in one part of the world. I just think we think about it as the interaction between humans and species you're likely to get an emergence event that way.
But let me put it a little bit differently. Would you counsel that people, wherever they are, China or any place else, ought to limit or diminish the amount of the kind of human-animal interaction that one imagines goes on in something like these wet markets in the interest of, reducing the probability that an event of this sort happens?
So what I'll say is, great question. And what I'll say is, I'll give like the public health recommendation version of it. I mean, I can't really comment on all of the things that on the culture. I mean, I'm not here to say that. What I can say is personal protective equipment and things of that nature are going to be very, very important. So, I mean, those things can happen, but I would say, personal protective equipment. I think given the number of viruses we've seen come out of there, that specific, that populations, I think kind of increasing regulations and things of that nature is probably a good idea. As we saw from, bird flu several years ago, there's a lot of a slaughtering of chickens because of this. So there were agriculture practices that were changed. So, I mean, I don't, I would say that we should just, I recommend personal protective equipment and kind of just a regulation of it and a kind of an increased hygiene and surveillance is what I would recommend from my expertise.
Okay, now you're a practicing scientist in this community, which I have to assume is a global community of scientists. You mentioned features of the genome of the COVID-19 virus. I assume we know that because the genome has been sequenced, and I assume that I understand that sequencing to have happened in China. Are you? Do you read the journals and talk to the investigators and stuff like that? Are you all talking to each other even now?
Yeah. I think, I don't have any current Chinese collaborators in China, but I think some of my close collaborators do, and I think you're right. I think this has been one of the, if there's a triumph of this thing, and we're still dealing with it, and it's causing a lot of pain, and will continue to, unfortunately. But it has been the rate at which science has progressed, and I think a lot of that has emerged directly from kind of cross-continental global collaboration. So yeah, I think it is very, very global.
Does politics play any role in that? I mean, are there restrictions on your ability to communicate with colleagues? Are the journals edited by people who are not, restrained by either the Chinese Communist Party on the one side or the U.S., security apparatus or science funding apparatus or whatever? How open is the global scientific community for investigating these issues?
So I can't speak. I mean, I think so. What I'll say is on the scientific side, with the scientific journals that we all read, I don't think they're any more political than they usually are. Which means there's always in the sense of, there's always politics of prestige and what have you, and who when what papers get published in which journal. I think that's always been true, and I think that's certainly playing out in COVID-19. But I think there's been groups from China that have published despite a lot of the skepticism, which is completely well founded with regards to the quality of the data and the reporting, and I get that. But despite that, I think there are Chinese groups who have published incredible stuff on this, and I think that have kind of built the early understanding through which the rest of us have, I'm citing a lot of this work, and it has appeared in kind of internationally read and recognized and respected journals. So I think there is a lot of politics that have played out, and I think certainly, in China, there's a large apparatus of, trying to, control the narrative, so to speak, but that hasn't stopped a lot of really, really cutting edge and important work out of China from being published that has informed a lot of my work and colleagues' work.
What do you say about the conspiracy theory I've heard, and I'm sure you've heard, that the virus escaped from some laboratory in Wuhan that's doing research on viruses and all that? Yeah,
it's complicated. Well, the answer is I don't think that's true. So let me just say that flat out. I think the reason why it's complicated is, number one, a lot of that was I feel was very, very kind of just initial xenophobia about it, and I think that fed a lot of the early xenophobia. Was that it was, and I think so. That was kind of weaponized politically rather than. But I think there is like a perfectly reasonable scientific question, right? Of there are labs across the world have bioweapons in their freezers, right? Everyone. I mean, I would be surprised if anybody has more than the United States, for example. And, we call them gain of function experiments where you kind of like move genes into a genome and see if, there's like a new function that you can, it's kind of like a bioengineering thing where you take a genome and you add pieces, or you take pieces of the genome from different species, you put them together, see if you can kind of tinker, just like in an engineering exercise. The idea here is, could an exercise like that conceivably, given kind of some of the nefarious practices of certain governments, could that conceivably create a virus like this? Well, sure. I think the evidence that we have, when you actually line up the genome against the ones that we see circulating in nature, it's extremely unlikely. This looks like a species jump, a classic species jump, a species that was a virus that was circulating in nature and kind of emerged from a species jump event. It doesn't have the signature of any kind of chimeric active engineering activity. So I would say no, that is, not the case.
What do you know about the work that's going on in hunting for a vaccine here? Does that relate at all to your area of expertise?
Yeah, so I've done virus evolution work. I haven't worked on vaccines, but certainly my understanding of virus evolution plays a role, is important for understanding the potential for a vaccine. I think the vaccine is, the trials are on its way, and there are kind of several candidates, and there are a lot of people working on it. And it's kind of focused on this spike protein, this one kind of protein that's on the surface. So a virus is kind of a virus is a very kind of crude. It's crude yet sophisticated. It's a protein shell. The genome is inside. There's a protein shell outside of it, and there's an envelope, which is kind of like an actual envelope. And I think there's a spike protein that sits outside, and that's the thing that interfaces with cells. Then that's the thing that binds to cells. And a lot of our vaccine efforts have been on that protein. I think based on we won't really know until we've done the trial, but I think based on what we understand about the biology of the virus, we feel there's reason to be optimistic that an effective vaccine can, put it this way, there's no kind of signs that it necessarily should be a problem, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, the spike protein really seems to be the area of our focus. And the mutation rate in that protein, the mutation rate, I talked about the rate at which mutations are made in general, is actually lower in SARS-CoV-2 than in influenza. Influenza actually has a higher rate of mutation than SARS-CoV-2, than really any of the coronaviruses. Now, why is that important? When you get the flu shot, generally speaking, one flu shot is pretty good for all the variants of flu you get that season. It's pretty good. Now, don't get me wrong. Some people do get a flu shot and can still get sick, but not typically. Generally speaking, right, we've gotten so good at making a flu vaccine, we're pretty confident that the one that we get will get you through whatever variant you may see. That's despite the fact that the flu vaccine mutates so much. So if you take a virus that mutates less than that, we're pretty confident that if we were able to engineer an effective vaccine that the body yields a strong immune response to, that it should have coverage. Now, how long is that coverage? How long will you need it? That's yet to be determined.
Let me just interrupt for a minute. You're saying it's a moving target, but if it doesn't move too fast, the thing that you introduced to try to deal with it where it is right now will probably be good, at least for a while.
That's right. That's exactly right. In the case of influenza, we do it every season because it's very, very seasonal. And that, again, it still causes a lot of problems, but vaccine has just been profoundly important, right, for influenza, and I think it can be for SARS-CoV-2.
Well, that brings me to the mitigation, opening up the economy and all of that debate. In addition to being a geneticist, you're also an epidemiology expert. And I want to know how you react to what you must be reading in the newspaper, seeing on TV about this debate, about the relations between the federal and the state governments, about the effectiveness of mitigation, about the extent to which early models of epidemiological forecasting may have overstated the mortality implications of this pandemic, or may not have, if you don't think they have done. What are you thinking now? Again, as a scientist, listening to a lot of people talking about this who are themselves don't know what WTF they're talking about.
Oh boy. It's frustrating. Yeah, there's a lot, and I think I have paid attention to this. And I've actually done some writing at the intersection of the society and.
Be very interested in hearing about that.
Yeah. And I think so. I try to be a scientist who does both of these things, who kind of is at least responsible with regards to how I think about these issues. Now, with regards to opening up the economy, I mean, I think we just need to think about. I'm obviously not qualified to speak on the economic costs involved with a recession or what have you. But what I will say is, when you take a look at the basic projections of the disease, how contagious it is, as measured by some features of the disease that we have a pretty good estimations on now, and it's kind of case fatality rate, the number of when you actually look at those numbers, doing nothing or underperforming with regards to its mitigation efforts. I mean, we are talking about a lot of loss of life. It's not a triviality. So when it comes to, do I think people have been alarmists? No, I do not. I do not, and I'm as a person who thinks about the public health interventions. Yeah, I mean, I think that aggressively intervening nice and early. Ironically, aggressive intervention early would have been better both for the disease and the economy. Right, in many ways, I think. Right, and I think that's what makes this disease interesting is we have some presumptive, and it's a little bit early to say. But we have some presumptive success stories, and I think if you look at the manner that I think Korea is the example, South Korea is the example, the best one. Japan's another one. The manner that they aggressively got on top of it and addressed it, and they had their first cases not much earlier than the United States. I think their economy is going to end up less damaged from it, also. So I guess my point is, so that's my general stance. I'll stop there and I'll let you ask me more nuanced questions. But no, I do not think we have overstated the problem necessarily. I think we can get into the models and why some of those might have been the way they are. But my general stance is that aggressive intervention was necessary and remains necessary.
Well, let's talk about the models a little bit because. Again, my inexpert sense is that an Imperial College, University of London study got everybody's attention, that it forecast that there could be many hundreds of thousands or even millions of fatalities without aggressive intervention, that the number of fatalities coming in has been less than what was initially forecast, that some of this forecasting is based upon assumptions that are very noisy. I mean, very hard to know if they're right or not because of the absence of data, especially the absence of random sample testing of the population so that you can know how many people might be walking around without symptoms who might be carrying the virus. And that a lot depends on the accuracy of these models. So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. This is a fascinating conversation. I'm very kind of thrilled and honored to be having with you because I think econ uses model. It really does get to the function of what a model's purpose is. These are like very kind of almost epistemological questions of what the purpose of a model is. Now, like you just said, the thing about an outbreak is almost by definition, you're not going to have a lot of data. You just don't. Like you don't. That's the point. Is you don't have a lot of information feeding these things.
Yeah.
And so your simulations they just kind of they can't be anything but wrong. And the point of them is not to be right person for person. So there's that. So I think I did not read that model. And you know what? You can criticize Imperial College model for the Imperial College folks, Ferguson and company, for the messaging, maybe, or you can criticize the media. I don't know. It's not about blame to me. I'm talking about how I read it. Yeah. What I read was I didn't take that number for number. I took that I took a lot more qualitatively. And I think, and that's the thing is, even when the quantitative projections themselves can be wrong, I think it was about the importance of social distancing activities and when they were implemented or not. or the importance of and the kind of the problems with waiting, I think is really the point there. And the importance of like sustained social distancing, I think was the point. Even if you're talking about an order of magnitude difference, the importance of now, if you was talking about 1 million, even if you're talking about 100,000, I mean, even if you scale it down an order of magnitude, I think with the models, a lot of those models said to me was, the earlier you act has these profound long-term consequences. So and I think it was kind of goad. I think the recommendation was to goad everyone into action as soon as possible, because even weeks of waiting has, whether or not it's whatever the scale you're talking about, it has these profound kind of consequences on loss of life.
Okay, let me just, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to reiterate what I think is a very important point that you're making about models and how they connect to policy decision-making, which is ex post facto, given the fact that there's so much uncertainty in the calculations and the assumptions, it's always going to be the case ex post facto when the actual experience comes in, that when you compare it to the model predictions, there's going to be a gap there.
Yes.
That fact does not discredit modeling as a source of information for public decision-making, because regardless of the specific numerical forecast, the qualitative insight that the system will move this way or that by this or that degree in response to this or that intervention could still be extremely informative. In the case at hand, the prediction that aggressive social distancing would stymie the rate at which the virus spread in the population has not been disproven by the fact that the particular numbers forecast as the extent of the spread of the disease proved to be over forecast of what has actually happened. Because the counterfactual of no aggressive intervention and a massive problem is probably still correct. Even though the actual numerical forecasts were in error. Did I say that correctly?
That is exactly right, and it is exactly right. And I think what's interesting is, so the question is, if there's going to be a gap between the model and reality. I mean, you pointed out kind of why do we need models at all, and that's come up, and there's been a lot of criticism. If they're and I think you just stated it. I think they still are able to offer these important kind of qualitative and insights on a problem. And that, I mean, it's qualitative is actually underselling it, because they're even quantitatively correct in some ways. They just may not be quantitatively correct they're just not literalizations. They're just, maybe intervening here does decrease the amount of infections or deaths by half, whatever the scale is, right? So they actually do offer quantitative insight. I think also, interestingly, in the context of an outbreak where we don't know things, models are especially important, because it's important to kind of put the facts that we have together to get some, right? Otherwise, you just have kind of isolated facts, like particularly early in a pandemic, right? We don't really know like what the incubation period is. So when you find out, and then that is basically the point between you're exposed to disease and when you develop symptoms. The amount of time, right? So you get that information, and then the rate of spread, the reproductive number, the basic reproductive number, which we've all heard of now in the press, the R0 factor, which is now very kind of well known, which is a proxy for its contagiousness. So my point is, in a lot of ways, not only is it important for kind of building out the even qualitative or somewhat quantitative important and relevant insights, it's also important for generating hypotheses and things that we need to be curious about. Like, I know a lot of things. I've read these models, early models, and I've realized, we don't really have an estimation for this. Maybe we need to think about kind of measuring how much symptomatic transmission there is, for example. It's a big one. We didn't really know that until fairly recently. But I think models kind of helped me as a scientist focus in on this area and go, we don't really have – I wonder how much it is. My research group is focusing on spread of disease on surfaces. I'm interested in how this disease gets around on physical surfaces and objects. That's something we don't have. We just now are getting good estimations of. So my point is, models have allowed me to put things together to ask, okay, well, we need to figure this out. What if the virus is surviving on the surface for yay long or they long? What are the implications for that kind of thing? oh boy, now we need to be thinking about this more carefully. So my point is, they're also hypothesis generating devices that allow us to kind of inform future studies and what have you.
Okay. You impressed by Fauci and Birx and Redfield and those guys?
I think overall, I think you put all of them in together, and I can kind of say things individually about them.
Please do.
Well, I think I am impressed by Fauci's messaging. I am impressed by Fauci's messaging. I just think as a whole, the response just is just a little bit hard to understand. So my point is, I think some, Birx is a very well regarded in infectious disease epidemiology and certainly in, I think they've all kind of in some ways managed to kind of, they've all managed to fall under the politicization of this pandemic in some ways. I think they're all kind of have to play in this, cage, so to speak, of the politicization of this pandemic. And so, because
have they not become as politicized as you feel that they have, what would they have done differently?
Well, I think some pretty loud and clear and aggressive, I just don't understand the fear of raising an alarm about a pandemic. That's something I don't really understand. I think there's this kind of thing where we can't scare people, but we're already talking about it's going to emerge as one of it's like the leading cause of death in the country. We're already talking about something that's very bad. We already knew that from Italy. We already had that in hand. So it's I think given the facts that we had about how explosive this is and the conceivable loss of life, I think some really, really strong and direct alarmist messaging early would have been good. And I think making, and I think again, even the economic stuff would have, because the way it's happening now, this is going to play out for a longer time because of the botched early response. So I would have appreciated that, but I think operating within the structures and the confines in which they've been given, I think certainly Fauci's messaging has been good, and I think Birx has been good at times, and
So you subscribe to this school of thought that says it's impossible to overreact? I can't remember exactly how it goes or who said it, but if we say we've overreacted, then that means we probably did it just about right. I always thought that was a confused.
I don't think that. I don't think that.
But you do think we did not not react strongly enough at the outset?
No. I think from very early, from calling it the Chinese virus and the Wuhan virus, I think from the beginning there was kind of a mea culpa slash political scapegoating. That was the playing field. It was much more about kind of who was going to be to blame for this thing than it was controlling it. So that and I think all of the language played in that landscape. So with that, I think that some really clear messaging that was aggressive and was based on the science and wasn't about kind of rebranding it. And so there was a branding, I guess is the good word, around this thing from very early in the United States. So no, I think it's very, very clear and stark messaging. Because the messaging could have been like this: look, there's a lot of things we don't know, but given what we've observed in Europe, where we've had a lot of it's a really good idea that we take extreme measures. The earlier we take them, right, the sooner we can flatten the curve, and the sooner we can get back to normal life. And that's just not how it happened. It was it was botched, conflicted messaging, and Fauci had to say this with 45 over his shoulder, and so the messaging just kind of wasn't clear or direct, which is a problem.
I guess at that level, it's impossible that scientific advice is not going to be politicized to some degree. I expect that would be the case no matter what the administration, although perhaps it's more so here.
Sure.
I mean, the job of the number 45 is different from the job of the infectious disease expert.
Right.
And the equities that are at stake are public health, to be sure, but they're not only public health. They are the political prospects of somebody who wants to be reelected.
Right.
They're also the economic well-being of, millions or hundreds of millions of people. So I wouldn't want to be on the hot seat. I'm just now giving my opinion that Fauci, you say you like his public messaging. I think it's really been pretty extraordinary, the performance that he's rendered. I don't doubt that there's a lot behind the scenes that we don't know of, efforts to influence him for reasons that we could not credit. But I got to ask you a political question, man. Okay.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Brace yourself. Now, you're an African American. So am I. So is Jerome Adams, Surgeon General of the United States. Yeah. So Adams got in the hot water with a lot of people, not only because he used colloquial language referring to grandmama and grandpapa, which was a little bit unusual. I've never heard that before. Ebonics from the Surgeon General. But also because he seemed to suggest that there was some behavioral shifts in African-American life, social life and whatnot that might facilitate, don't drink alcohol, stay 6 feet apart, wear your mask and your gloves. And he directed his message to African Americans. Yeah. How did you feel about that?
Oh, I found that very offensive. And I found it personally offensive, and I found it scientifically irresponsible and medically irresponsible. Now, here's the thing. Let me be most charitable to that perspective. I'll start with it, right? Let's just say that all of those things are true. Right, like factually true, right? That these behaviors are concentrated in these communities, at a way which is particularly when it comes to like smoking is one of the worst kind of associates with this disease, and that one is not necessarily right. Like, is not concentrated in those communities. Actually,
not especially so. No, I don't know the numbers offhand, but
so smoking, right? So my point is, so that's part of the problem right there, right? Like, it's kind of like this cherry picking of behaviors that you're. But let's just say it was for charity's sake.
Okay.
I think it's in the middle of a pandemic. Yeah. If you want general messaging for Black and Latino communities that they need to kind of improve, you could have been doing that all this time. Like you could have a weekly address.
You didn't need a pandemic
to have that message. And I think to do that in the middle of a pandemic where the disproportionate number of deaths have been, particularly African Americans, it's just deeply offensive, and it's scapegoating. So, like, even if the language wasn't offensive, even if he had said it in a manner that was not kind of colloquial and beneath, I believe, the office of the Surgeon General, say he had said it in a way that made us both more comfortable. I mean, I don't know how uncomfortable it made you, but I'm just saying, say the language was, better and more careful. Just scapegoating alone in the middle of a pandemic is just deeply irresponsible as a Surgeon General. I mean, your job is to, the messaging on that was like clearer and more direct than the messaging on gloves and masks.
Would you have a problem if the NBA or somebody were going to trot out Steph Curry or LeBron James or somebody, and they were going to say, not necessarily based on race, but because of their race, the effect of them saying it would be especially pronounced. Look, I want all of our fans to, practice social distancing. I mean, the hygiene thing is really important. Come on, let's get with it. Let's bend that curve. Let's do our part.
Yep. Well, I mean, I think that hypothetical kind of doesn't work for me because Steph Curry and LeBron James do messaging for in the Black community. Like, they actually, like, Stephen Curry had Fauci on a live interview.
I didn't know that, but that's good.
Yeah, he's actually had, and like LeBron James, like, opened schools, and like these are people who do things in the African American community that actually do address. I think LeBron James's students get very good meals that actually address the issues that the Surgeon General was talking about. So I think both of them actually work at that. They do that messaging better regularly. So I think both of them are smart enough to not talk about it in that manner. So that's why I have a hard time kind of like imagining that scenario, particularly in those two cases, who are very kind of strong and relatively outspoken African Americans, prominent African.
Point taken. Okay, I got to thank you. This is Brandon Ogbunu, whom I'm talking with here. He's assistant professor of evolutionary biology and other stuff here at Brown University, and I'm very grateful for you giving us some of your time.
Professor Loury, Glenn, I'm honored. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Happy to come back anytime.
All right. Well, we're going to have to talk about that Charles Murray book maybe a little bit later in the summer or something like that.
Happy to. Very, very happy to. Anytime.
All right. So long then.